Nitumia tangu zamani, kwa hiyo nikizungumza katika lugha nyingine inaonekana kwamba ni lugha ya kigeni. I just wish I could continue in that trend. When I was up in the music hall 2 days ago, I was very glad to see on one of the bulletin boards up there in the music hall this little book. Perhaps you can't see the title from back there. Man, what a God. I was glad to see it up there. Many of you have no doubt read it. And those of you who have not read it, I think you would certainly enjoy it. It's a tremendous little book because its subject is the most tremendous thing we know of. God, your God, my God. Last night when we went out of the meeting, I stood there and gazed up to the wonders of the sky. I've always been fond of astronomy. Fascinates me, although my mind just cannot comprehend all of those figures. But as I looked up into that beautiful clear sky last night, again the wonders of our God were impressed upon me. Looking off here to the south, I gazed at that galaxy, the Milky Way, where scientists tell us are over 200 million stars. 200 million stars. I thought they could have put in at least 4 or 5 extra million and at least been somewhere near correct. But 200 million stars, only in that one galaxy. And they say that we have over 1 billion galaxies that man has discovered. Where do you stop when you start talking about figures like that? And those were the figures when scientists still felt that the rim of our universe was only 350 million light years away. Since then, 1963 to be exact, other discoveries have been made. Our astronomers today believe that the so-called rim of our universe is 8 billion light years away. Can you understand that? I can't. And then when you look at an ordinary human being, let's take a young man down here in front of me. As you look at him and you realize, I better check my figures to make sure, that this one boy down here has a total of 6,000 billion cells in his body. That's the average. Hard to understand. Of course, the cells are broken down into molecules. 200 billion molecules in each cell. Then the molecules are broken down into atoms, and on the way down, protons, neutrons, electrons. But when you stop to think of a God so tremendous, a God of astronomy, a God of the human being, the human body, no wonder Sister White said that pride is the one sin that God hates most. How can a human being, that infinitesimal little spot walking down on this one little earth that rebelled, be proud? Yet the wonder of it all is that my God, your God, the God whom we love, the God whom we serve, the God of the atom, the God of the island galaxies, has requested you and me to address him as Father. Our Father which art in heaven. Oh yes, 1,000 times over, hallowed be thy name. What a God! Yet he is your Father, my Father. What are some of his names? Isaiah gives us a few. Isaiah, the 9th chapter, Verse 6, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Man, what a God. Some of my childhood favorites as far as Bible stories are concerned was the story, of course, first of all, perhaps Daniel in the lion's den. How could God keep those wild, vicious lions from having their supper is what I used to wonder as a kid. How is it possible? I knew about lions. I lived in a country where lions used to roar, and as a little kid I'd run to my dad, and the only place I felt somewhere nearly secure was on his lap when those lions were roaring down in the valley, 300 or 400 yards from the mission home. I knew what a lion was. I'd seen some of those man-eaters that my father had shot, and I couldn't quite understand how it was possible for a whole room full of them not to eat Daniel. And then perhaps another one, equally fascinating to me as a child, the story of Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Many times during the dry season, we would have to backfire. I'd go out with my father. We'd have to backfire to protect the mission property. And quite often, just one little spark would land on my bare arm and really cause me considerable pain. Fire. I used to be afraid of fire. And hear this story of these three men who weren't afraid of that king, that potentate whose word was life or death. I've gotten acquainted with one or two of these African rulers. If we have time, I'll tell you about one later on today, whose word is life or death. Yet here is the king that ordered these three young men to bow down and worship him. Read the story again. Daniel chapter 3. The whole chapter tells you a wonderful story of courageous youth. Three young men who were not afraid to die for their God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In that fiery furnace, not one hair burned. A wonderful story. And then a few years ago, I had the privilege of visiting the Holy Land, as no doubt quite a few of you have done. There was a little hill about 9 miles to the northwest of Jerusalem. And of all the places, of the many places in the Holy Land that I enjoyed, perhaps I enjoyed that spot as much as any. A little hill, the hill known as the Hill of Gibeon, where Joshua stood one day and where Joshua prayed. In the 10th chapter of Joshua, verses 12, 13, and 14, what a tremendous experience. What a miracle. God had given Joshua a job to do. He had this task to do. The sun was setting. The task was incomplete. Verse 12 says, then spake Joshua unto the Lord. In other words, he prayed to God. And what happened? Joshua said, sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And as I stood on that little hill of Gibeon, looking off to the west, that great valley of Ajalon, what a thrill came into my soul. Here is where man, a human being like you and like me, but he knew how to operate the power of prayer. Prayer can do anything that God can do. And Joshua prayed. You might say stupid, presumptuous. How could a man ask this world of ours to halt in its turning on its axis? But the God to whom he prayed made that very little spot in the universe. So why not? Verse 13, verse 13. And the sun stood still, And the moon stayed for nearly a whole day while Joshua finished the task that the Lord had given him. Dear friends, dear young people, when I think of a God like that, I'm humbled. It makes me very humble. How can he use me, even though I stumble and stutter along in my Christian experience? Yet, Jeremiah tells us that God has said, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. What a thrill. Yet so many times I try to figure out the problems that come into my life myself. Yes, perhaps Robinson has enough brains. Perhaps I can figure out this problem. In our administration in the mission field, we have many problems. The little Central African Union, when you look at the map, you can hardly see it up there. It's such two small little countries. But it has the densest constituency of any union in Africa. At present, we have just over 110,000 baptized members. There are many problems, but oh, how wonderful to know that I don't have to solve those problems. It's not my work, it's his. Surely he can help us take care of those 110,000 dear believers up there. And when we so stupidly, as human beings, rely on self, like the psalmist says, lean not upon thine own understanding, trust in the Lord with all thy heart, and he shall direct thy ways. Here in school, a place that I enjoyed some of the most pleasant years of my life, for 7 years, I had heard about this God. My dad had preached about him. I'd interpreted for my father many times. As a kid, I could pick up those tribal languages much easier than my father. I'd heard my father tell these poor heathen about the true God, the only God, although they, of course, believe that there are many gods. Oh, a God for the gardens, a God that keeps your chickens laying eggs. There's another God that will perhaps, if you're lucky and give him a goat as a sacrifice once in a while, he'll keep the lightning from striking you during the rainy season. There are many gods that the Africans have, up in Central Africa at least. And so, to hear my dad single out one God, to them was very strange. But since my days here at Heidelberg, I've had the privilege, the sweet privilege, to serve that God, the wonderful privilege to feel the power of that God, to know that what he says he will do. He keeps his promises, and this wonderful book is full of those precious promises. Yet, humanly speaking, we are so prone to trust in self. Instead of simply reaching up in simple childlike faith and clasping that hand of our Father in heaven through prayer. Yet, we don't avail ourselves of that wonderful power. Last night I mentioned to you, and I'd like to complete the story of my trip up to Kolwezi once. Kolwezi, a name that is now in the news again after 16 or 17 years. Kolwezi, the headquarters of Chombe's Air Force. Those old aircraft were in such a dilapidated state of affairs that even the major in charge, my friend Jerry, said, I don't know how those things keep flying. We don't have the spare parts. We don't have the service. Yet they keep flying. But Chombe had just purchased from regions south of his country one brand new Dove de Havilland. A Dove de Havilland is a twin engine, a little aircraft that when you load it to maximum will take nearly 1 ton. There had been a lot of fighting in the Katanga, tribe against tribe. As I mentioned last night, a state of affairs that could possibly be called a reign of terror. Up in the area of our Bigobo station, we had a dispensary. The government had placed a radio up there to keep in touch with the small garrison that was placed at the little village of Bulula, about 22 kilometers from our Bigobo Hill station. I'm sure Henry Murray and possibly one or two others know of the village of which I speak very, very well. The radio message that had come in to President Chombe's office the evening before was, we have just had another raid. There are many severely wounded people, and all we have left in the Bigobo and the Bulula dispensaries is an amount equal to 1 bottle of aspirin. Men with poison arrows in them, men with arms shot off, men with legs dangling by a few shreds of flesh. Please send us some medicines. We need these medicines desperately. That was the message that President Chombe handed me when I went into his office the following morning. Please, he said, please, Reverend Robinson, can you take a load of medicines up to Congolo and Bulula? I knew the perils. I knew the dangers. The United Nations had those Katanga skies filled with Swedish Saab jet fighters. And they had shot down several of Chombe's planes. I assured President Chombe I would do what I could, that the Lord willing, I would try and deliver a ton of medicines to the Bulula station, where they could divide the medicines between the Bulula and the Bigobo dispensaries. In the meantime, I went over to the head of the United Nations. I tried to persuade him, Colonel Bern of the Swedish battalion, who was in charge of the Swedish Saabs, then combing those skies for any aircraft that dared to leave the home base of Kolwezi. I'd gotten acquainted with Colonel Byrne pretty well. As I requested him, as I explained to him the urgency of the mercy mission I was about to undertake, no more impression than proverbial water on a duck's back. Then I, in desperation almost, decided to appeal to him from another angle. I said, Colonel, imagine the newspapers in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago coming out with the headlines, an American missionary shot down by the Swedish United Nations troops while flying a mercy mission carrying a ton of medicines to desperately needed people. I said, what sort of a headline do you think that would, what sort of effect would a headline like that have upon your operation here in the Congo? He knew better than I did that whole operation, the entire fiasco, is being supported by U.S. taxpayers' money. Well, that sort of jogged him a little bit. All the other arguments had absolutely no effect. Then he said, well, Robinson, will you make sure to have your aircraft well decorated with red crosses? I said, I shall. We had received permission, special permission, from the International Red Cross in Geneva, that whenever these mercy missions were to be undertaken, the aircraft, the trucks, the trains, the river steamers, whatever they were that we were using for distribution of food, clothing, and medicine, be clearly marked with red crosses. I filled up the Land Rover from the government storehouse in Lubumbashi with about a ton of medicines, drove up to Kolwezi, 300 kilometers, and that evening knocked at the apartment door of my friend, Major Jerry. I handed him a little note. This note was from President Chombe, ordering him to give me priority on the brand new Dove de Havilland, to take this ton of medicines up to Bulula. The Major looked at the note. He said, well, Robbie, he said, it's only because it comes from my Commander-in-Chief. I will have to concede. I have other plans for that aircraft. That afternoon, in fact, it was into the evening, with the help of several of the other folks up there in Kolwezi, we loaded the 1 ton of medicines into the Dove de Havilland. Jerry asked me which pilot I'd like of his experienced mercenary pilots. I said, please let me have Jim. Okay, Jim it was. Early the next morning, I was told to be ready at 5:30 for a dawn takeoff. I spent much time praying. I realized, as the Major had pointed out to me, the various localities on the map where, as he called them, the enemy have anti-aircraft fire. I realized that there were dangers. However, I realized that to my God, nothing is impossible. Everything is possible. But I prayed. I asked the Lord if it was his will that he continue to open the way. That morning, as the gleams of dawn started to brighten the eastern horizon, the pilot, Jim, three of us, started to approach the aircraft. The pilot got in. I was talking to Major Jerry for just a few moments, and as they were getting ready in the aircraft, the Major turned to me and he said, "Robbie, I think everything's ready." I walked toward this little aircraft, and as I raised my right foot to place it on the step, the 3 steps that would take me inside, I had heard a voice just as distinctly as I hope you're hearing my voice this morning. "Do not fly in that aircraft." I hesitated. Foot paused in the air. I turned around. Was it the Major? No, it wasn't the Major's voice. Oh, then I realized. I walked back to where the Major was headed for the hangar. I said, "Jerry, I'm sorry to disrupt your plans, but I've just had an order from my commander-in-chief. I cannot fly in that Dove de Havilland." "Oh, what's the matter with you, Robbie? I've never known you to chicken out before. You're getting scared." I said, "No, Jerry. When you had that letter last night from your commander-in-chief, what did you do?" "Well, I had to obey." I said, "Jerry, I have to obey." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Give me a few minutes. I'll tell you." I went into a little room in the back of the hangar, little workshop, office, tool room combination. I got down on my knees and I said, "Dear God, dear Heavenly Father, what do you want me to do? Everything has been lined up for this brand new Dove de Havilland. In fact, on the tachometer, it only had 25 hours of flying. Brand new. The order was, do not fly in that aircraft." I said, "Dear Lord, is it possible you want me to fly in some other aircraft? You know the people up there desperately need these medicines. Lives are at stake. People are dying. I'm willing to go, dear Father, but what do you want me to do?" Then I made a specific request. "Is it your will that I fly in the other aircraft? One that was parked right beside the new one, also a Dove de Havilland, but one that was way past the service, a major service, one that I'd heard the pilots talking about the evening before. They called it this Old Kite. Won't fly much longer. But it was the best that they had up there. And so I said to the Lord, do you want me to fly up there? May I take these medicines in that other aircraft?" Not a voice again, but an impression so clear that I could not misunderstand it. Came the answer, "Yes, go, and I will be with thee." With complete serenity, I felt assured. I knew it, my God never makes a mistake. I went out to Jerry and I said, "Well, Jerry, please help me transfer all of the medicines into the next aircraft parked beside the new Dove." "What's the matter with you, Robbie? Are you crazy?" "No, Jerry. Those are my orders from my commander-in-chief." The pilot, Jim, came to me and said, "Listen, Robbie, something must be wrong. I don't even want to fly that one." I said, "Well, will you if I ask you to? If the Major asks you to?" "Well, only because it's an order from the Major. But that aircraft just isn't safe." He said, "We can't get that Old Kite more than 5,000 feet in the air. I flew it 2 or 3 days ago. It will not climb. It doesn't have the power." I said, "That's the aircraft we're taking to Bulula, Jim." They had to call a special Italian mechanic to get one of the engines started. One, after trying, Jim finally got the one to turn, finally got it to work. But the other one, the pilot knew nothing about getting it started. It just would not start. They had to send back to town. We waited half an hour for this Italian pilot to come, mechanic to come. He worked on that aircraft engine nearly an hour before he could get it started. As I slammed the door behind me, walking into that Old Kite, I walked up behind the pilot, leaned behind him. I said, "Jim, let's have a word of prayer." We prayed. Some of these hardened mercenaries were very religious men, and they appreciated that little prayer. The aircraft was loaded, actually almost beyond its capacity. It took the full length, nearly 2 kilometers of that Kolwezi airstrip to become airborne. As those tall trees at the end of the runway came rushing up toward us, it just seemed as if we'd never clear them, but we did. That trip itself was a combination of several miracles, but we arrived safely. We could see the anti-aircraft firing at us, sitting ducks at 5,000 feet. Nothing touched the aircraft. We landed at Bulula. Besides the medicines that I was able to deliver, was 1 year of salary. The workers in that area, due to the fighting, had not been paid for the previous 6 months, and no telling when they would get paid again. I had taken up their salary, which I handed to Pastor Simon Muhune to pay the workers up there for another 6 months and their back pay. The pilot refused to turn off those engines. While they were unloading, while I was talking to Pastor Simon, those old engines were still going. He said, "If I turn these things off, I'll never get them started again." That evening, about 5 o'clock, as we approached Kolwezi, normally, that time of the day, Kolwezi Airport was dead, very quiet. But as we circled over the home base, looked down there, we could see an unusual amount of activity. It was strange to see so much activity. We landed. Major Jerry came walking up to me as I got out of to the aircraft. And as I got out of the aircraft, Jerry walked up to me. He clasped my hand. He said, Robbie, I wish I had a commander-in-chief like yours." "Why? What's the matter, Jerry?" "1/2 hour after you took off in that Old Kite, the brand new Dove de Havilland crashed on takeoff, killing everyone in it." Man, what a God. Yes, He's able. We didn't sing our theme song this morning, but we will throughout the week. He's able. He's more than able to carry you through. He is able, dear friends. He knows the end from the beginning. He knew just as clearly as I know what happened yesterday as to the condition of that brand new aircraft. Are we willing to trust our future in the hands of a God like that? Are we, as young people, so determined to fashion our own future that we want to be totally responsible for our future, our educational plans, our plans for what we want to do in the future? Or are we willing to realize that we know nothing? And as Jesus said, John 15, verse 5, "Without me, ye can do nothing." Do we want to accept that? Do we want to accept that our Father in heaven, who knows everything, who knows the future, much better even than we know the past, and let Him guide our lives? Let Him have something to say in our future plans? But will it pay? Talk it over with your Father. Talk it over with Him in prayer. Let him have something to say about your future. And dear friends, as we place our hands in his, those everlasting arms, that right arm of his powerful majesty, of his righteousness, will guide us. He has promised to. He will not disappoint us. Although we disappoint him, although so many times we try to meet the wiles of that old devil in our own strength, we stumble and we fall. But oh, dear friends, what a privilege to know, to serve, and to love a God like my God, like your. Is a promise that thrills me. It was read to us for our scripture, as part of our scripture. I'd like to just read verse 20 once more. Now unto him that is able, he is able to do what? Exceeding abundantly. Oh my, what a blank check that is. Exceeding abundantly, above all that we ask in prayer, or above all that we think. That's my God. That's your God. And as we go through this week of prayer, dear young friends, I hope our opinion, our image of that God will change. I hope that we will fully understand that he is able to carry us through, that he is able to do exceeding abundantly, more than we ask, more than we think. And what a privilege to love him, to serve him, and to pray to him. God bless you. Amen. Amen.